thank you all so much for being here to honor the memory of James Horine, or as I like to call him, Papaw. I'm going to open up with a word of prayer, and then I will read the obituary, and then you guys are stuck with me because then I'll have some stories to tell. So go ahead and bow your heads with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you once again for the opportunity that we have to gather and just be here to remember the life of Papaw and just sharing the memory, sharing his glory, that we know that he is up there with you, getting to experience the blessing of heaven. God, thank you for the time that we all cherish and the memories that we have of him. In your son's name I pray, amen. All right, I'll now read the obituary. James P. Horine of Georgetown, Kentucky, passed away surrounded by the love of his family and friends. A man of faith, service, and adventure, Jim lived a life dedicated to helping others and making a difference in his community. Born with a servant's heart, Jim answered many callings throughout his life. He proudly served in the Kentucky National Guard, the United States Army Reserve, completing his duty with honor and attaining the rank of sergeant. His professional life was equally diverse, beginning with the Fayette County Sheriff's Office and the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, where he served with distinction and also served as an EMT, detective, and transportation coordinator for Georgetown College Athletics. Continuing through roles with Sally Horse Fans, JR Services, and as a safety and security director. Sorry, I messed up a line here. Continue with Georgetown Athletics, where he loved planning travel and caring for teams. Later, he drove for Bluegrass Tours, where his passion for travel, history, and storytelling made him a beloved guide and a companion to many. Jim's heart for service extended far beyond his career. He was deeply involved in his community, serving as a past president of the Bluegrass Breakfast Lions Club, past chairman of the March of Dimes Bluegrass Chapter, past chairman of the board of Harmony Christian Church, election commissioner for the Scott County Board of Elections, and a member of the executive committee of the Scott County Republican Party. He also served proudly as a licensed tour guide in Washington, D.C., helping others experience the history he so deeply loved. Always willing to encourage and support others, Jim was a faithful booster of Georgetown College athletics and the Lexington Legends. He had a gift for seeing potential in people, inspiring them to be the very best version of themselves. His commitment to faith, family, and community was a constant light to all who knew him. Above all, Jim was a devoted father, papaw, and brother. He is survived by his living daughter, Cynthia Kahn, his cherished grandchildren, Elijah and Abigail Roush, and brother S. Thomas Horine. Jim's legacy is one of faith, friendship, service, and adventure. He never shied away from a new journey, and now he has embarked on his greatest journey, one going home to be with his Lord. His family finds peace in knowing that he is reunited with those who have gone before him, and they invite others to remember him by sharing a story, offering encouragement to a friend, or taking a trip, because that is what Jim would have done. All right. Now on to my poorly worded stories. I was not gifted with the storytelling ability like he was, but I will do my best. This is dedicated to my papaw Jim. Mr. Eli, Elijah, Elijah 1. My papa would always call you, me, or objects anything other than their God-given name. So I lived with Papaw Jim for a couple years off and on during college. Typically when I was home on the weekends, Saturday mornings I was usually woken up by Papaw Jim or my stepdad John to go to Waffle House. John would come in and make the comment to Papaw saying, "There's usually one thing that'll wake that boy up, and that's food." And he was right. So we would get up and go to breakfast along with the usual group of old men, drinking their coffee and munching on bacon at the Waffle House, swapping stories, most of which sounded true. Typically weekends at Papaw's included one breakfast, usually at Waffle House, coming home and watching TV, which usually was an old Western, Blue Bloods, Chicago PD, or Chicago Fire, or the combo of Chicago PD and Chicago Fire. Then dinner, probably at Roosters. However, one weekend, I was out with Mom, Abby, and John for dinner, and I get a call from Papaw. And I lost my place here. Okay, so I get a call from Papaw, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing in your room? It's really loud." I said, Papa, I'm not in my room. He said, okay, I'm calling the police, and then hangs up. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, something's wrong, but he didn't tell me what's wrong. So I told John to gas it to get to Papa's. So we rushed there, and when we arrived, there were 2 to 3 police cars with all their lights on surrounding the house. And I questioned what was going on, whether Papa had got himself in trouble or there was trouble at the house. After I was able to get in and talk to the police and talk to Papa, I come to find out somebody was trying to break through the window, and Papa had a small hatchet. So jokingly, I kept that small hatchet beside my bed, but somebody was trying to break into my bedroom. So there was never a dull moment when we were with Papa and involved in one of his adventures. Unless you were riding in the car with him, then it was usually complete silence. Or sometimes there was a police scanner playing in the background. But usually those car trips involved stories and conversation. And I could go on and on about those stories, as I'm sure we all could, of trips, bus rides, history lessons, discussing politics, Bible stories, and so on. But one thing was for certain, when Papa was there, the room always seemed a little brighter. Stories were told, laughs were had, and usually food was involved, typically down the belly of one of our shirts. And nobody was better at clearing their way through a crowd than Papa. My grandpa was a great example to us growing up to love God, love your family, and love your country, and roosters. Thank you, Papa, for all the laughs, adventures, and for being my hero.
First of all, I'd like to give my condolences to family and friends, and my wife and I cannot imagine what you've probably been through over the last long period of time. So our heart goes out for you. Jim called me. By the way, my name's Bill Cronin. I was a head football coach at Georgetown College for a number of years and retired just 3 years ago. So it's been a few years since I've seen Jim, since we've talked. He was just a great guy. He started out as my neighbor. We lived right next door to each other. I must say there are some legendary stories about Jim Horine in our neighborhood that still are out there. Regina, you might recall the time that he caught on fire. Trying to help a neighbor out, I understand, this was before I moved into the area, trying to help a neighbor out. They're taking care of some brush down in some common area, and using gasoline, somehow it ignited Jim, and he's running all over the place on fire, and so apparently it was quite the sight, and not much harm done. But the neighbors still talk about that every time there's a campfire or something going on. There was a time as my neighbor where my boys, my sons, and some other neighborhood boys had built a tree house. And Jim was always concerned with the surroundings. He was always on top and aware of what was going on in the neighborhood, of course. And this tree house was here just near his house on common ground. And I think for a couple days he watched the boys with hammers and nails and all kinds of tools, and who knows where they got the wood and so forth from, but he was worried. It was pretty flimsy, not a very good tree house. Of course, I was off coaching. I didn't know anything was going on, and apparently one day when the kids were in school, Jim went in and tore it down and explained to the parents that he was afraid of what might come of this tree house, and I think he was right. Of course, the kids didn't like it, but now that they have kids of their own, they understand, I think. I also had an opportunity to work with, I was playing, but Jim was working at Georgetown College. He was our bus guide. He was the driver. He was the guy that was taking our football team from place to place. And he was always very professional, did a great job. I could take this talk into a couple different directions. Number one, he was known to get lost every once in a while. Number two, he had an encounter with stop signs for some reason. They always jumped out in front of him, and the poor bus. And then a time or two, he got pulled over by the police because of lights or speeding or whatever it might have been. But Jim was very good at what he did. There's no question. But we continue to have some laughs on his behalf. One of the things that he really enjoyed the most, I think, being with the football team, and he was with all athletics, not just football, but he enjoyed being around the players when we were on the road, down the lobby, listening to the coaches and seeing how they operated. And then he would sit in on some meetings from time to time. After a ball game or something, it wouldn't be unusual to see Jim talking to a player or a coach, or just kind of giving us a different perspective, which was healthy a lot of times. He was a good man. He was a good man. He was always looking out for others, and I appreciated that in him. One time I was able to invite him into the locker room, and he enjoyed the locker room scene. We'd be in there talking, and before I knew it, it's pregame, and he's fired up. I thought he was going to put on a helmet and go out there, but he loved the atmosphere. He loved to watch the kids compete, and I think he appreciated the way we did things. So today, what I would like to do is, it's game day. Today is Saturday. We would be on the road. Jim would be with us. He would have gotten us all the way down to Florida if that was the destination. And I would invite him into the meeting today. This would be a day when he would be in our pregame. So we're going to have a pregame right here. I would typically ask the players they'd be on a knee and I'd be in front, and coaches and everybody, they're looking up at me, and I'd tell them a few reminders from the week and our opponent and how it needs to go, and then I would ask them, you, to bow your head for a minute. So please bow your head. We'd have a prayer. Lord, you now have our friend Jim, and we know he is looking down upon us daily. Please help us remember what a great influence he has had on our lives. Continue to remind us of the impact that he has had on all of us. Help us realize the kind of difference we can all make in this world if we just care about others as much as Jim did. And I would ask you to say the Lord's Prayer with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. God bless the family, the friends, and God bless Jim Horine. What a great man.
These get harder and harder to follow, but we'll give it a shot. I was honored by to be asked by Jim and Cindy to say a few words. I'm pretty confident that everyone here knows Jim as someone who enjoyed telling stories from his experiences. He actually had a PhD in storytelling from the School of Life. So I'm going to do my best to tell some stories concerning the doctor himself. Now, this may be hard because it involves my mom and dad. So I'm going to start by telling the story passed down from Jim, my dad, Don, and my mom, Barbara. And it goes a little something like this. My father was dating my mother, and he actually had a job interview one day with Kerr Brothers Funeral Home in Lexington. And it, like I said, just so happened he had a date with my mom. So their date consisted of them driving from Louisville to Lexington. In my dad's convertible. Of course, the drive they made was with the top down because it was a nice, warm Kentucky day. Once they arrived in Lexington, they proceeded to Kerr Brothers, where my dad, being the nice, caring sort of chap, or chump, depending on one's point of view, promptly left my mother to swelter in the car. However, there was someone who was working at the funeral home who saw my mother sitting patiently in the parking lot. That someone was Jim. He went out to see how she was doing, brought her inside, offered her a Coke, and a cool place to continue her wait. No one knew it at the time, but it was the start of a 60-plus year friendship. My dad did get the job at Kerr Brothers, where he and Jim worked together. And a bit later, my mother and father were wed in Louisville. Sadly, one of my dad's groomsmen was unable to attend the wedding, and with just 48 hours notice, Jim was brought up to the big league to be a groomsman for my father. There is a picture of the wedding party with Jim sporting a very crisp 1960s style crew cut and giving that Jim grin. A few years later, Jim married Miss Sally in February 1967, and the reception was held at the Ramada Inn. After the reception, Jim and Miss Sally proceeded to the car. Now, the car, of course, was not Jim's civilian car. It was the sheriff's car. And once they got on the road to embark on their honeymoon, someone came over and asked, Jim Horine, this is dispatch, and we just want to make sure that you have the right equipment to proceed with this honeymoon. Now, as Miss Sally told me the story, she did say she was a tad bit embarrassed. And that embarrassment continued a few days later when on the way home from their honeymoon, they stopped at my mom and dad's, where my dad asked her if she had a good time with a sly, very Don wink. Now we're going to continue on to the winter of 1971. Jim and Miss Sally, my dad and my mom, and others attended a Christmas party hosted by Bruce and Patsy P-Rat. As the story goes, there were several ladies at the party who were in various stages of pregnancy. One being a very pregnant Barbara Mays, who would give birth to my brother Keith a month or so later. But we'll just say the seed was planted, and as September rolls around, it's now Miss Sally, who is very pregnant. Now, this is not about Miss Sally. This is about Jim entering into uncharted territory of fatherhood. As Miss Sally tells it, Jim was a trained EMT and experienced lawman, but the nerves of being a new dad had him running red lights and trying to get to the hospital in the early morning of September 10th. Later that night, Jim's star got a little bit brighter when they welcomed Cindy into their clan. We'll fast forward from the 1970s to the 1980s. And Jim told this story every time I saw him. I was offered a job in Chicago, and at the time, Jim was working and traveling for Sally Horse Van. As luck would have it, he was traveling to Arlington Heights Racetrack, and he was my ride to Chicago. As we drove north on I-65, and as Eli said, a very quiet car, there were two cars who were traveling, one in the fast lane, one in the slow lane, and they were traveling very slowly. And we were a couple cars behind them. And the traffic was starting to back up behind us. And this went on for a couple of miles when all of a sudden this big Mercedes S-Class comes flying past in the emergency lane. As they were going past, they pulled up to the car that was in the slow lane, moving rather slowly, and provided a friendly wave. And it was usually about that time when Jim would turn to me and say, "Who was driving that Mercedes?" And I would have pretty much always respond with, "It was William the Refrigerator Perry." He would give that Jim chuckle and grin and continue on to the next story. This story was just told a few weeks ago when I was visiting him. He was still giving the same grin and still telling stories and still telling that story. And of course, we had heard the stories many times over. But as he told them, I welcomed them. For life has a way of providing lessons. Excuse me. And although I am not a learned man, I am aware of the importance of being present. I found happiness isn't elusive. It's found in the conscious act of being present. And to quote Marcus Aurelius, albeit I'm sure I'm not going to do this exactly and it's not going to be precise, Marcus Aurelius states, "It's not death that man should fear, but rather fear of never beginning to live." I believe Jim lived, and he lived well. I look at Cindy, I look at Abby, I look at Eli, and I look at everyone here, and Jim is living in all of us in some small fashion. There'll be a story that's told that Jim He touched us all with his kindness, compassion, and love. He was a very integral part of my life, and he will be missed, but not forgotten. Lastly, to Jim, I say Godspeed.
How does the daughter of a man who could tell a story like no one else stand here and try to tell stories about him? My dad had a way of drawing you in. He remembered every detail, every expression, every sound. And when he told a story, you weren't just listening, you were living it with him. If I've learned anything, it's that Dad's life itself was one long story. A story filled with love, laughter, adventure, and purpose. One of the threads that runs through so many of his stories is travel. Dad loved to see the world, but even more, he loved turning every trip into a memory that would be told and retold. I think back to the trips with the Mays family. After ball games or outings, we'd all pile into Steak and Shake. Most people would just eat their burger and fries, but with Dad, it was always bigger than that. He had us laughing, retelling stories, creating moments we could carry forward long after the plates were cleared. And then there was our big trip out west. Wide open skies, mountains, and at one point, a buffalo that decided to chase us. Dad loved to retell that one. He would grin and say, "All I saw was elbows and assholes," because the whole family scattered in every direction. He told it for years, and every time his laugh would fill the room like it was happening all over again. But Dad wasn't just along for the ride. He wanted us to pay attention. On that very same trip, when Aaron, Lindsay, and I were glued to the Game Boy and arguing about whose turn it was, Dad had had enough. He decided the journey itself was going to be the classroom. Suddenly, he was handing out quizzes about the things we were passing, landmarks, history, even funny little details along the road. At that time, we may have rolled our eyes, but now I realized what a gift that was. He taught us not to miss the journey. And of course, there were moments when I became the story. Like the time at Wounded Knee Memorial, when I fell and busted my knee. I promise you, Dad told that story more often than I wanted. He could turn my clumsy moment into something that had everyone laughing. If you ever traveled with my dad, you probably heard his famous falling rock joke. Every time we'd see those yellow road signs that said, "Watch for falling rock," he'd go into his routine about the poor old Indian named Falling Rock who was still missing. We must have heard it 100 times, but somehow it stayed funny, probably because in his joy of telling it never faded. Travel wasn't just about family vacations either. Dad loved driving the bus for bluegrass tours and Georgetown College. To him, it wasn't just a job, it was a way to connect with people, because that's who Dad was. Once you were on his bus, you were in his life. He carried those friendships, those conversations, those people right along with him. That same spirit is how Dad met John. A simple breakfast at Waffle House turned into a great friendship, and in time, something even more, his son-in-law. Only Dad could sit down with someone over coffee and eggs, and before long, weave them into the fabric of his family. And oh, how he loved being a papal. He took Abby to Destin, Florida, and it wasn't just about the beach. It was about teaching her teaching her to notice, to organize, to value the details. I think he probably slipped in a spreadsheet lesson or two. Because if you know Abby now, you know she's strong, independent, and yes, she can make a spreadsheet for every family event. When I look at her, I see so much of Dad in her. She is his legacy carried on in the next generation. Eli got his own adventures with Papa too. Dad tried to, at every chance, to turn him into a UK fan. He'd take him to my old Kentucky home, and he'd give him the thrill of riding on the UK tour bus. But it wasn't just about basketball. It was about showing Eli where he came from, passing on a piece of his story. And in those trips, in those talks, Eli got to see his papa's heart, a papa who was proud, who was present, and who wanted his grandson to know just how deeply he was loved. Dad also loved being a part of Harmony Church. He found such joy in planning trips for his church family, organizing the details, making sure everyone had what they needed, and of course, turning every stop along the way into a story. Church for him wasn't just a place to worship. It was a family he poured his heart into. And if you ever called my dad, you know his unmistakable greeting. He'd pick up the phone and in that steady, familiar voice say, "This is Jim." Simple, straightforward, and somehow it said everything. It meant, I'm here, you've reached me, I'm present. That's who he was in life too. Always steady, always present, always there when you needed him. And if there's one thing I know, it's this. There's nothing my dad wouldn't do for his friends or his family. I could tell story after story of his generosity and love for the people around him. He gave of his time, his resources, and most of all, his heart. If you needed something, he was there without hesitation. At home, he also gave himself to his community, serving as Republican Commissioner of Elections. He carried that role with pride and with integrity, believing it was important to do what was right, to keep the process fair, to leave things better than he found them. But more than the trips, the jobs, or even the stories, Dad's greatest legacy is love. Love for his family, love for his friends, love for people he barely knew but welcomed as if they belonged. So how do I honor a man who told stories better than anyone else? I think the answer is this. I don't have to tell them as perfectly as he did. I just have to keep living them, to take the trip, to laugh at the dinner table, to run when the buffalo comes charging and laugh about it later, to keep the falling rock joke alive, even if your kid's grown, to pay attention to the journey, not just the destination, to live with open arms and an open heart, just like he did. That's what Dad did. That's what he taught us. And that's the story he leaves us to keep writing, through me, through all of us, and through Abby and Eli, who remind us that his love, his strength, and his spirit aren't finished. They live on, calling us to keep telling his stories and to keep living life the way he did, with joy, with courage, and with love that never runs out.
Fayette County, Unit 11. Fayette County, Unit 11, Jim Horine. This is the last and final call for Unit 11, Jim Horine, who dedicated his life in serving, protecting the citizens of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Jim Horine, we've got it from here. Rest in peace.